All right.
Great. Now we are on to our first real story that isn't a PSA, and it relates to DJI being blacklisted by the Department of Defense, which, like I said earlier, I thought I heard about this months or maybe a year ago, and so I was like, didn't that already happen? Well, did it, Blunty?
It was announced to sort of be planning to be happened, essentially. And then this is the final, this has happened, essentially. So if you check there and scroll down, we've got 2 sets on that piece of paper there, tranche 2, and then you can see tranche 1. So tranche 1 was where we heard about DJI possibly going on the list. However, the only people who ended up going on the list were like 50 other companies, and DJI was threatened to go on the list by the DOD along with other companies. So the new list, that tranche 2 above, is what we have as the new list of 13 companies plus DJI who are now officially on the list. And before, you could technically still do investments and things, but it wasn't encouraged. Now is where it starts to be, there's actually the investment issues and things like that, where you're not supposed to work with them anymore. Previously, they already had the import ban, so like we couldn't export stuff to them. Like certain companies, like if you were making chips or whatever, you couldn't export those. But now specifically, if you're a government agency, you're not allowed to do stuff without a specific exception with them, and you're also not allowed to do investment.
You said government agency. Is this just the DOD, or is this all federal agencies?
This is the DOD report for all federal agencies, is my understanding.
I see.
This is like the Department of Defense is issuing a letter identifying who is a CMC, a Chinese military company. The other thing that should be...
I see. So it's like if your local cops came to you and said, hey, you shouldn't drive your car to work. We think there's some security risk with doing that. It's like the DOD is going to the federal government as the sort of official security arbiter of the federal government and saying, don't do this. But this is binding on the whole federal government.
Yeah, and essentially because, I'm not sure about binding. I don't know that it's binding.
Okay.
It seems more like a name and shame sort of deal. Seems like hey, your association with these people is an issue because we believe now with evidence that we are presenting with this piece of paperwork that we believe DJI has been participating as a Chinese military company. So it's more like, here's justification in your departments, and here's like ways you can say like, here's how I'm going to ban globally, these kind of things in my departments and stuff. That's my understanding of it. It does not directly ban anything.
Okay.
It is more of like a name and shame directive to say like, hey, this is a Chinese military company, and we have identified that they are working with Chinese military.
So certainly no one in the DOD is going to be using DJI, but other federal agencies perhaps could choose to ignore this, although it might have ramifications or might be politically unwise.
That is my understanding, yes. Yep.
Now, a lot of people are curious as to whether this is a blanket ban on the sale and use of DJI in the USA.
Yes, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
It's not even close to that. They may do that. I mean, that's something they say the United States government reserves the right to take additional actions on these entities under authorities other than this section. So basically, if we think this is a bigger deal, then we're going to start banning other stuff. But they have currently not done that. Basically, this is supposed to be an official document from the U.S. government that says, hey, these people are working with the Chinese military.
Well, that's not untrue.
Yeah.
It's not untrue.
DJI claims it is untrue. So
I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on the way that laws work and companies work in China, but my understanding is that you essentially can't be a large company in China without having some close ties to the Chinese government, that they kind of have their fingers in everything. The idea, I think the worst case scenario, if I were a general at the DOD, clearly I know how to get into their heads, I would worry that the worst case scenario is that some kind of a conflict starts between the USA and China. The military is using a whole bunch of DJI drones, because of course they are, because they're amazing. And then suddenly the Chinese government says to DJI, look, we're at war now, shut those drones down. And DJI goes, yes, sir, and does it, which is a completely plausible scenario, except for the part where we end up in a military conflict with China, which is not that plausible. But as the DOD, you got to worry about those things.
Yeah. Yeah, DJI says just a quick thing. They say DJI is not a military company in China, the United States, or anywhere else. DJI has never designed or manufactured military-grade equipment, has never marketed or sold its products for military use in any country. DJI stands as the only drone company to clearly denounce and actively discourage military use of our products, including suspending all business operations in Russia and Ukraine.
And yet, excuse me, I'm coughing. And yet we know for a fact that police departments, SWAT teams, and yes, military personnel use DJI drones.
They seem to be making the distinction that they're not designed for that. Like they don't have
meaningless
military contracts and things. But yes, I would agree. So
okay.